Breaking overnight, new moves and new threats by President Trump to send the National Guard into blue states over the objections of governors, even if it takes emergency powers to do it. The Republican governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, posted a picture showing National Guard troops from his state boarding a military aircraft. We're told the president has activated Texas troops to deploy to the Chicago area, where protesters have been clashing with ICE agents. Flight records appear to show the troops landed in neighboring Indiana overnight as they await what comes next. Now, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker has called the mobilization an unconstitutional invasion. The city and state have sued over it, but a federal judge declined so far to immediately block the troop deployment in Chicago and has given the Trump administration until Wednesday night to respond to the suit. And if officials or courts stand in the president's way, the president says he could get around them by invoking the more than 200-year-old Insurrection Act.
So far, it hasn't been necessary, but we have an Insurrection Act for a reason. If I had to enact it, I'd do that. If people were being killed and courts were holding us up, or governors or mayors were holding us up, sure, I'd do that.
Let's get to CNN's Whitney Wild live in Chicago this morning. A lot of twists and turns and developments overnight, Whitney.
John, so much is left to be seen. It is not clear if these National Guard troops will actually move into the city. Our understanding, based on limited information, mostly coming from the Illinois governor's office, is that hundreds of troops from the Illinois National Guard have been called up to move throughout the state. As you mentioned, the governor is also saying that Texas National Guard troops have been called up. As you said, they appear to have arrived, at least in the area. We do not know any timing on a potential deployment. It is not clear if they're going to wait until the courts weigh in or if they are going to move in before DOJ actually files their response to the Illinois lawsuit. DHS and Illinois law enforcement and local officials here look at this situation completely differently. Obviously, the Department of Homeland Security looks at the protests that have blown up at the Broadview ICE facility, which is an area about 30 minutes west of Chicago, where we have seen for weeks protests that have resulted in clashes with federal law enforcement. Multiple people have been charged with assaulting federal agents there. Further, DHS is pointing to a shooting that happened over the weekend with their agents after they say they were boxed in by 10 people. They were vehicle rammed. They opened fire on a woman who was eventually hospitalized and then was released from the hospital. There are 2 people who are now facing charges in that case. That is the DHS position. Meanwhile, here in Illinois, local leaders say this is all the result of DHS overstepping. You heard the governor's own words. He calls this an invasion. He says any of these interactions, any of these blowups are solely the result of DHS's egregious actions. Here's more from Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker.
Donald Trump is using our service members as political props and as pawns in his illegal effort to militarize our nation's cities. Since the beginning of this invasion, families have been snatched up off the streets or removed from their homes, zip-tied and detained for hours, including especially U.S. citizens and legal residents of our state.
The governor says that they are going to use every lever at their disposal to try to fight this. Again, they've already gone to court. They are hoping for a temporary restraining order. Meanwhile, the mayor of Chicago, Brandon Johnson, signed another executive order. This is the last in a series of executive orders that we've seen. This latest one creates ICE-free zones, John, where he says ICE is not able to conduct any kind of operation, cannot stage, cannot process any detainees. And this extends not only from city-owned property, but also extends to private businesses if they do not want ICE on their premises. This executive order bars ICE from operating there. John?
Got it. Whitney Wild again. We're watching the courts, we're watching the ground, we're watching Washington. A lot going on this morning. Thank you very much for all that. Kate.
Absolutely right. And joining us right now is CNN senior legal analyst, former federal and state prosecutor Elie Honig. So, Elie, where are we we've got Illinois filing suit. We have Oregon who's filed suit. Where are we with these cases right now?
So the law that Donald Trump is using so far is an emergency law, but it's not the Insurrection Act. Important to keep those things different. The current emergency law that he's using says that the president can deploy National Guard, even if the governor doesn't want it, if there's a rebellion an invasion. Let's put those aside. What he's using is a broader category if necessary to enforce federal laws. Now, do the conditions on the street meet that? That's going to be up to each individual judge. Thus far, in Oregon, in Portland, the federal judge there has temporarily blocked Trump's deployment. That judge has said, does not meet the definition of necessary to enforce federal law. In Illinois, I want to make this point. That judge has not necessarily said, come on, bring the National Guard in. For the moment, the judge has said, I'm not going to block it now, but I need more information and I need it quickly. I need it by Thursday. And if you look at the transcript, it looks like that judge is leaning towards blocking it. So it's not quite right to say that that judge is allowing National Guard. And that's the practical effect for now, but stay tuned. I think we may see a different outcome there.
And stay tuned kind of quickly, potentially. But kind of this gets to the broader point of like people may have a hard time when you're looking at the legal arguments here of just following all of this because you have multiple cases in multiple different jurisdictions and multiple different places, some on hold, some not. How should people make sense of this?
So we're not, at least for the immediate future, going to get one overarching resolution on all these. Each of these is a separate case. I mean, the conditions on the ground may be different. You may have conditions that meet the emergency. For example, a few months ago in Los Angeles, the judge, an appeals court said, this does meet the definition given the protest, given that there's some violence involved. But you're going to have different situations in Portland and in Chicago. And so think of each of these as just separate. They all have different judges in different federal districts, different facts. And so it's going to be a while before they filter up through the appeals courts and before we get some uniformity.
Let's then talk about separately. We played that clip of the president talking about how he's open to invoking the Insurrection Act now. How would that be different?
Okay, so the Insurrection Act is a different law. The important differences between the Insurrection Act and the current regular Emergency Act are this. First of all, the Insurrection Act involves all military. So that could be Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, not just National Guard. The other thing is there is a Supreme Court case goes way back, 1820s, where the Supreme Court said the president can invoke the Insurrection Act and the courts cannot even review it. However, since then, there have been other decisions that undermine that say, well, in extreme circumstance, if the president uses it in bad faith, we might be able to review it. But the Insurrection Act is broader. It gives the president even more broad powers. And that's why Trump seems to be talking about it as a potential bigger stick to bring out.
Also sounds like another area where like the legal boundaries have yet to be tested, and that we could be heading in that direction. Hasn't
been used since 1992, and that time was at the request of the governor of California, so we didn't have a legal dispute then. So yeah, a lot that we'll learn.
Great to see you, Ellie.
Thanks, Kate.
Thank you so much.
Zach, I want to start with you because you told me you actually had to go read up on the Insurrection Act, which if any of you do, it's not that long. So
it's only like 4 paragraphs long. It does sort of suggest that presidents should be asking governors to bring troops into their state, but there are clauses that say if there's an insurrection, like basically it seems like Stephen Miller, watching him just now, he read the Insurrection Act, ripped that language for his interview with Boris yesterday, and there's just clearly, at least in the way they're phrasing things, laying the groundwork to cite this law. It was passed in the 18th century, in the 1798 was the first version of it. It hasn't been updated since Reconstruction, and it hasn't been used since the 90s with the Rodney King riots. And before that, I think more applicable would be when it was used for like school integrations. Like Eisenhower used it to integrate schools in Little Rock in the 50s.
I want to talk about the way they're talking about this. What does it mean to be calling everything terrorism?
Well, I think it takes away from the word terrorism then. I mean, like terrorist, as we know, and we've talked about a lot, like 9/11, I actually do think the drug cartels being considered terrorist is like...
we're going to talk about that today.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is fine. But listen, I just don't understand why the governor and the mayors are falling on this issue. I mean, I get it. They're looking like they're strong to beat back Trump on this issue, but it is a law and order issue that I just think is really difficult.
Let me tell you what's going on here as far as politics go. There's an overarching theme here. One is the Texas governor would love to be the president in 3 years, so he wants to go out and say, look what I'm doing to help President Trump.
Right. He's also the one who put migrants on buses to Chicago.
Oh, yeah.
So
the
his
exact same reason,
antagonization
That's a
of
great
Chicago
analogy. Also, J.B. Pritzker, who y'all just saw on your camera, wants to run for president. There's all of this overarching theatrics going on, but there's real people's lives at stake when they're one trying to one-up each other to be the toughest one in the room.